Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Straight Science. Straight Science is a science seminar series put on by UAF Northwest Campus here in Nome, and also UAF Alaska Sea Grant, also in Nome. And so thank you for your patience while we got our technical difficulties out of the way. And tonight's speaker has traveled. There's actually two speakers. They've traveled from Seattle, and it's actually perfect. We're having a stormy ocean. We had the remnants of ex-typhoon Ampil, I believe is what they called it, come through last night and give us, or all day yesterday, and give us a what for. So the ocean has been on our doorstep, and we're going to hear about the ocean tonight. So we have Heather. Well, before that, I just want to say UAF Northwest Campus and Alaska Sea Grant are public servants of the Bering Strait region. We serve all peoples of the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, St. Lawrence Island Yupik, and Central Yupik peoples. So with the ocean on our doorstep, literally after having Typhoon Ampil roll in last night and yesterday, talking about the ocean seems very fitting. So tonight we have Heather Tabisola. She is a research coordinator at the NOAA, NOAA, Pacific Marine Environmental Lab in Seattle. And we have Anjali Shah, who is a NOAA Holling scholar. So we're going to hear more about the Oculus Ocean Drone program, which was launched out of Nome in 2022, the drone. And we'll hear the adventures of this and what lies ahead for their program. With that, and remember, the big reveal for the visual on Heather and Anjali will be at the end as they're working through their technical. And so bear with us and welcome, Heather and Anjali. We're so excited you guys are here. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm going to turn up the volume here. Okay. So this is Heather. I'm Heather Tabisola. Like Gay said, I am a research coordinator officially with the EcoFoci program at NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Lab. I officially work for the University of Washington through the Cooperative Institute. So it's a really long title to share often. And Anjali Shah is with me today. She was a NOAA Holling scholar with our program this summer for 10 weeks. And she got to work on glider data, not the one launched off in Nome, but she'll run through some of the 2023 data that we have from the Southeast Bering Sea. And I'm just really excited that we were able to bring her up today. So Phyllis, thank you, because I know you're on the line. Thank you for letting me bring her with me. It's been an adventurous day. And what did we hit off today? We found, what was our animal list that we found? Muskox,
ground squirrel,
anything else?
berries,
maybe the swans, and we ate all sorts of berries thanks to Gay. So we've had an adventurous day. So we're here to talk about the glider. It's this nice pearl azumi yellow robot looking thing in the upper right hand corner. It's actually what we call an uncrewed system. And we started building this in 2015, and we started working on this project. We were funded through NOAA's OMAO, Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, Uncrewed Systems Office, funded for this 3-year proposal that started with our 2022 launch here off in Nome. So a few things have happened since we've been here. The last time I was in Nome was actually in 2017. And that was at the start of PMEL's sail drone project. So that was the last time I actually got to visit. In April of 2022, Phyllis Stabenow gave a straight science talk at the beginning of our Oculus project. So that was 840 days since our last talk with you. In that time, we've had 2 missions completed. So one is the gliders. One glider was deployed from a small boat, the Audrey Cady, which was a local vessel here in Nome, Alaska. And then we had another mission in 2023 that was an oceanographic research vessel base. So that was a NOAA ship launched in the Southeast Bering Sea. So we completed 5,331 dives between the 2 glider missions. And it was about 1,800 pilot hours, but only a total of 75 days at sea. you will learn in this presentation that one of those projects required a lot more babysitting than the other project. The Audrey Katie in 2022 deployed that glider, actually went through Bering Strait and was recovered by the Healy. So we'll talk a bit about that story today. And then we think that's the first known transit of a sea glider through the Bering Strait. We might be the only people crazy enough to try it. And then also the 2023 mission, which Anjali will talk about later, was a really unique opportunity, kind of one of those that scientists, it's like a love-hate. We ended up being out there where there was ice, and that what was happening in the ocean at that time and how things were evolving. And that's really what we've been trying to get at with a lot of this technology. It's a kind of a mysterious time of year. And so just you'll hear a little bit more about that. But to be associated with like ice algae production and also
is being recorded.
chlorophyll phytoplankton bloom. What happened? Are we good? Okay. Okay. So what is a glider? Here's a refresh. You like this one, Gay?
I think your audio
Makes this one unique is that it's the only operation. So traditional legacy gliders are built for really deep water, like 1,000 meters. The gliders make really nice, beautiful kind of U shapes through the water, but they're not developed to make the really necessary, like quick change in buoyancy needed to work in shallow water, like the Bering and Chukchi Sea. And it also, with that, does not have the capability to push through highly stratified waters, which also happen to occur in the Bering and Chukchi Seas. So this glider was developed to fill a gap in that system and allow us to observe things in a better way. So this diagram kind of shows the tail of the glider. It's, end up, so we use satellite communications. That's how we'll find the GPS fix. There's fixed waypoints also in the glider that we can adjust when it comes up to the surface. And then you can see as it dives down. So on the bottom left-hand corner of sort of the little poster here, you see this kind of sideways Y. That's a track line shown in the data. So that's number of days that a track has been out. That's actually the mission Anjali will talk about. So that's the Southern Bering Sea mission or the Southeast Bering Sea mission. And then you see as the glider hits the bottom and then kind of comes, it doesn't hit the bottom, I shouldn't say that, but goes near the bottom with this nice V curve and makes its way back up to the surface. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a little bit of the interface, sorry, this is not bigger, of what it looks like on the system as the people are piloting or driving the glider. And you'll see a blown up version of that in a little bit. The data on the top is what, when we process it through sort of how we get to look at it. So instead of it just being numbers in a system, this is how we visually look at the data. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the glider itself right now as a basic structure collects salinity, temperature, looks at light, turbidity, fluorescence, pressure, and oxygen. In its initial development stage, the intent was to potentially put a whole lot of other sensors and things on it. So the other part of this, you'll see it sort of looks like it's 3 compartments. That middle compartment was designed so that we could put different payloads and things in it. There's a whole other history and development side to this glider I won't go into right now. But there was a lot of great things planned. So let's see, moving on to the next. Okay. So my yellow dots are going to be here on the map, but this could be overwhelming at first look. The EcoFoci program, who we work for and represent, was established in 1984. It was to examine the physical and biological factors that affect the pollock industry in Alaska. In actuality, the program started in Shelikof Strait. So I don't actually know if you can see the mouse, but down,
Yeah, you can. Yep.
down here, just really specifically in Shelikof Strait. Over time, the program has expanded and conducts research not only in the Gulf of Alaska, but the Bering Sea, the US Arctic, and into the Chukchi. And we do that to improve understanding of ecosystem dynamics and to provide science to support management of living marine resources. We use a variety of observing tools, so that's what we're showing here on this map. The 3 dots are highlighting kind of some of the locations we're going to talk about today. So these are moorings at fixed locations here in the Southeast Bering and then the Northern Bering Sea. The mooring to the south, the M2 mooring, that's our Peggy mooring. That is the only mooring we have that it's in the April to September timeframe is a surface mooring.
So one thing this happens all the time with researchers. Can you explain to the audience what a mooring is?
Oh yeah, I have a picture. It's actually kind of next.
Awesome,
Mostly
awesome.
picture. But a mooring, if you think about it, instead of being at a dock, if you had a float out in the water that you would tie your boat up to, that has a chain and an anchor to the bottom of the seafloor, very similar, except that that float and the chain have oceanographic instruments that help measure salinity and temperature that is now tied into that. That would then collect measurements. And then once a boat goes out to that mooring site, hauls in the mooring, that's where we would collect the data. So the M2 mooring on that southern one is the only one that we have that has a surface buoy during parts of the year. And that one, in particular from that site, we can get near real-time data about what's happening in the water. And I'll show a little bit about that in a second. But the M8 site in that northern section, and then the little circle to the right, that's our M14 mooring. That's the one closest to Nome. Those are what we would call subsurface moorings. So you would not actually see the float. It would be reported to US Coast Guard, so they're on maps and locations are charted. But the float would sit below the surface, and that's because they sit out there all year round and then would be impacted by ice. So we don't want to lose the moorings when ice comes there. But I will show kind of a diagram in the next spot. So ecofoci, just to give a quick background of that too, we are a joint program. I'm sure as people know, NOAA has many different compartments and many different divisions and 5 line offices, but we sit both on the NOAA research side. So that's sort of foundational critical information where we like to put really expensive things in the water to see what's happening, right? Sometimes we get it back, sometimes we don't. And then we work with the NOAA fisheries side, right, which is the mandated side of NOAA that works on preserving blue economy and the fisheries and helping to maintain a healthy ecosystem in whatever region, but specifically, obviously, we're working in Alaska. So in our group, we're really trying to understand both the physical oceanography, like the currents, the temperatures, salinity, and things that are happening, but also trying to understand larger scale processes like fish recruitment. So together, we do everything like nutrients, phytoplankton, zooplankton, and ultimately our goal is to get a complete ecosystem picture. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this is on the right-hand side, a very useful, maybe not user-friendly diagram of a mooring. What you see on this left line is at the bottom, these are the railroad wheels that we use as the anchors. And then this line up here, this is the float that sits below the surface. This is actually the M8 mooring. And then everything you see on here, these are sensors that we put on the mooring. So these are actually what we use to submit to our team at PMEL to design the mooring. And then all this list is the table of sensors that are on there. One of the unique parts about M8 that we want to show is this is for the ecofoci program. What we're trying to make is what we're calling observatories. Most of our mooring sites are co-located with several moorings, right? So you might have one that holds an ADCP, you might one that holds specialty equipment, like something we have listed here. You might have one like a marine mammal acoustic mooring, co-located with a current meter, with temperature and salinity. So we're getting kind of a full picture from a particular reason. M8 is a really unique location. That we've been adding different sensors. And I wanted to highlight here sort of the partnership that we've had with AUSE and the addition of Asuna, which helps measure nitrate, because what we've been trying to look at is the difference in what happens between nitrate in the Northern Bering and the Chukchi Sea and that other sort of circled mooring that's more there to the north. It's basically focused to look at sort of how things are changing in both of these regions, as phytoplankton serves as sort of an energy source in the Arctic marine environment by converting nutrients and sunlight into a food base that ultimately sustains the marine life in the region. So in the Chukchi, the nitrate is a limiting nutrient for phytoplankton. And so year-to-year differences in the amount of that nitrate that's available to sustain spring production can vary by almost 50%. so these differences result kind of from a magnitude of transport that comes from the Bering Sea into the Chukchi. And so by able to monitor that by adding something like Asuna here at M8, we can, and at C2, we can look at the difference between these connected observatories to provide a more complete picture of what's happening here in the region. Okay, let's see. So then we have some updates that Phyllis asked me to share, and she's on the line, so she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure she'll be kind. So this is also at the M8 site. So historically, one of the big things that we do look at is temperature and how temperatures are changing. And I think this one tells a really unique story of a region where temperatures have been and really been above 0 degrees and are now regularly above 0 degrees. Yes. So as you look across the years, so this mooring has been out since 2005, or this data set starts at 2005. This mooring has been here for 20 years. You get to like 2014, where you start seeing this trend go up in the bottom temperature. The bottom temperature is indicated in the blue line on the bottom row. The surface temperature is the red. The middle bar, the purple lines, that's presence of sea ice or ice cover over the mooring. So we can see a change that's happening there as well. And then the top is the temperature anomaly. So the difference that's been happening. So we can see a warming trend. Phyllis can comment on this later, but this was not something that we thought would be happening, that this warm water intrusion in the Northern Bering would be consistent in this capacity. What does that mean? How big is that warm up area? One of the things gliders can help tell us is that, again, moorings are a fixed location, but the glider that we're going to talk about can help give us more spatial resolution and sort of be able to investigate this region a little bit more. So that's, we'll talk about that a little bit, but that's definitely something she's seeing and wanted to share that. And then to talk about that even a little bit more, what kind of implications that means. You know, NOAA, we talk a lot about the cold pool, and it's a thermal refuge and barrier, and it is extremely important. And this is a little bit of data shared both from Lyle Brett of PCOD spatial distribution. So those are the two graphs in the upper right-hand corner. We're highlighting two particular years, 2010 and 2019, and then compared or shown with Phyllis's data here. The graph on the left shows the number of days when bottom temperature is below -0.5 degrees Celsius at M8. So in 2010, where we have this really well-developed large cold pool that extends from here, from the Northern Bering along that 70-meter isobath down into the Southeast Bering, you can see we have over 300 days where the bottom temperature is at that degree. So it's helping maintain that cold pool. And then in 2019, in that particular year, you can see in the purple dot isolated here that we have less than 200 days, and it's really a cold puddle. And you can see the spatial distribution. This is Pollock, that sort of purple blob that kind of goes across. So you can see that in 2010 on the upper right-hand side, it kind of stops there, right? It's almost like this wall that's preventing.
Can you put like circle your mouse where Nome would be so people might orient?
Nome is up here. Yep. And then you've got St. Lawrence here, right? The island. And then cold pool extends to the southern end of that and all the way down here. This is about where M2 actually is down here. So in this year, this purple section, this is the Pollock. So you can see it kind of stops along this line. And then in 2019, you can see what's happening to it. It's moving further northward and across this barrier here across the southeastern Bering Sea. This is I'll call this the cold puddle. So what warming implications, you know, having a trend like this, we may continue to see patterns like this as well with species distribution. Moving a little bit further south. So when I was talking about that mooring that has a surface buoy that we can get real-time data, this is actually data from this year. I pulled this just before we flew up to Nome. And one of the things to note here is what you're seeing is the temperature at this particular mooring from almost the surface to almost the bottom. So we're using this technology called a crawler. And so instead of having fixed locations along a chain, we have basically a cord instead with an instrument that then moves itself back up and down using wave energy. So it gives us high resolution data that almost looks like the glider, but it's just from that single point. So you can really see the evolution of how things change as it's moving across. So it starts at the beginning of the season when we deployed it in April, and it goes till just before we left up here. And what you're seeing is cold temperatures starting here when we deployed it in April. And then as that temperature warms throughout the season across. But what you notice down here is this sort of line. These remind me of like Bob Ross trees. So I don't know if there's any other Bob Ross fans, but these happy little trees that are down here in the cold water are below this black line. And the black line is indicating where we normally see that little line, like the purple trees should be up there. So what this is showing is that we have a much lower or much deeper mix layer than what we've historically seen at the M2 site. And Phyllis knows because this mooring has been there for 30 years. So I'd say that's a pretty good historical record that we have going. So in a year that maybe where surface temperatures or this water column maybe looks like it's cooler, we also have to recognize that there's a deeper mix layer to allow more mixing of that heat through the water column. So instead of keeping the heat in the upper layers where it traditionally would above a 20 meter, that line that's there, we're seeing that evolution and mixing throughout the column, water column. So if we wanted to see maybe how big or how far this mixed layer extends, is it just in Southeast or Bering, or does it extend farther? We could use something like the glider to analyze that and understand maybe how far that goes, or maybe if it's just in that particular region. Okay, now we're going to move into the summer of 2022. I want everybody to think back what you were doing in August, because what we were doing is planning a mission that we thought we were going to put out 2 gliders. We were going to use a boat from Nome. We were super excited. We were get our gliders out in the water. We were going to stay in the northern Bering Sea. We're going to go visit M14, this mooring that we've had out there. And then we're going to demonstrate that we can do it, that we can navigate in this region, and that, you know, and by now we would have, you know, immense, wonderful data in a paper published. But, you know, things change and stories happen. So we're going to walk you through this a little bit. M14 sits at the front of the ACC, the Alaska Coastal Current. This is something we know, but it's also a story of sort of where we naively didn't know how wide and how strong it was at this particular time of year.
Is it that gray arrow?
That gray arrow, yeah, although I think,
Right?
I don't know if that's supposed to actually indicate the width, but it is to say that we do know there's a current there. And when we're planning this and we're looking at it, we also know shoaling happens. We know we've got currents coming off the underside of St. Lawrence Island. This is not an easy area to navigate in, but we thought we could do it, and we mostly did. So we're gonna go through this a little bit. We learned it's wide, it's strong, and that they are, in fact, we already knew wind-driven currents, but that our little glider maybe isn't as strong as we thought it was. So little picture of the glider again, picture of the region. We've got Nome marked down there by the yellow diamond. We've got M14, and then this colorful line you're seeing here is a track line of that particular mission. It went out to the M14 mooring, and in this time with
This meeting is being
oh my
recorded.
god,
Just keep going.
we struggled.
This is our technology.
Oh wow. Okay, this is so fun. We struggled with winds. There was a lot of winds that were coming from the southeast. It's sort of like today. I honestly had a moment where I said, "Oh, I wonder, you know, if our little glider was out here, our poor little glider would have been through Bering Strait again." Like, there's no way.
Yeah.
There's no way that it would not have gone. So maybe August is just off the table for deploying out here. But this is our adventurous little track. And one of the fun things, I just think this is neat. This is the full track here, but what you're seeing are vectors of how fast we went. So at one point, the fastest speed over ground we calculated was about 3 knots per second. Just flying. Yeah. So it was like, yeah, 1.38 meters per second. Yep. So 3 knots just going. So we did 1.1 nautical miles over 2 dives at one point, while we were in what we think was the Alaska coastal current. So yeah, so we went on a fun adventure, but you can see even here when we deployed, we were still getting pushed to start, and we're able to kind of make our way over. And then this is where we hit a whole lot of winds that were pushing us north. And then we were able to get south, but still winds that started pushing us sideways, and then winds that just pushed us back up. And it was about this location that we just decided to stop fighting it, a little bit further north, and went with it. And we were lucky in that the glider can go for about 3 months. We did not have a particular ship in the Chukchi at the time, so we did not plan to go through Bering Strait. But the Healy was around in the Chukchi at that time. So in early September, after about 30 days out, they took the special request and they recovered our glider. So that was incredibly kind. I know not their first priority up here, but really thankful they were able to squeeze that into their mission, and we got our glider back. But yeah, that was quite the adventure going through. And this is just a fun plot. We haven't gone through all the data yet, other than, some trends and things we've seen. This is just the inside of the glider. Phyllis really likes this picture, so we put this in here for her. It's a great way to see kind of the design of what the insides look like. But this is also the track line. So if you think about the start here on the left, what we're looking at, that's the deployment just off of Nome. So this is salinity this time. So how salty that water actually is. The light green that we start off with here is really saline water, what we would typically want to see. And then as we go in this sort of blue, that's low saline water. So what's interesting about this is we know the Alaska coastal current has typically lower saline water. We also know that when storms come, we probably have an influence of fresh water coming off the Yukon in this region. What this is yet, I'm not 100% sure. Could be either, can be both. But this is the deployment here off of Nome. And as we go through the mission, we do get some of this really freshwater output here, or I would say lower saline, I shouldn't say freshwater output. And then this point we highlighted is about when we really started getting those northward pushes. And then you can see some intrusions of really low saline water, and then how that runs through. And then this is going through Bering Strait, about right here. And then this is actually up in the Chukchi. So, and then right before we got recovered.
So just a quick question. Does that mean as you're going further north, and you might, I hope people can hear me. I'm not sure if they can.
Say aloud.
But my question is, as you're going further north, I noticed there's yellow is less saline.
This is really saline right here.
Oh, okay, so that's more saline.
This is more saline, the
Okay.
bright yellow.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
I thought green was-
Yeah, we need to do a neat overlay plot. We haven't gotten that far. Anjali and I were trying to plot it out before we actually came tonight, because we were like, oh, some interesting mixes in here, and especially right here. So I don't know, something we'll look at, something to still work on. And Phyllis is I think we're gonna work on a paper next. We finally got the M14. We have 3 years of data to look at from there. So we finally have that back. Got the data from, the glider, and hopefully some time to sit down and analyze it. So that's next. And then we can show a little bit more of that. And then this is just to show right before Anjali steps up here. This is, what we look at. So we've got, we have different chlorophyll here at the top. So these are different, parameters. You can see, again, salinities right here, the temperature. So this was our 2022 glider, how it moved through its mission. And then on the right is the 2023 glider in the southeastern Bering Sea. So again, just that really high resolution, but larger spatial area. We can look at fronts and things that are developing, if we can navigate it in the right way. So are you ready? Okay.
Yeah, why don't you stop sharing your screen for a second?
Okay.
And then Anjali's got it in working the way she needs to, we hope.
Did you get it? Look at you.
Okay.
Looks
So.
Well done. Do you want to plug in? Or are you good? You can sit down and present even, I don't care.
I'm thinking I should. Oh, okay. I might put my audio on and just turn.
Yeah, and turn your audio off.
Super technical here.
Nope, turn your.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Can
Yep,
someone
you hear just
verbally
fine.
give us a yes or no?
Yes, we can hear you. Can hear you just fine.
You have your volume up?
Well, we're nothing shy of having fun.
This is, can you hear the speaker?
Yes. Go for it.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. So my name is Anjali, and I was a summer intern with the Eco-Foci Lab Group, and I worked with Heather, Phyllis, and another research scientist named Sean, and I got to explore some of the glider data with kind of a personal focus on the parameters of spring sea ice melt and productivity in the southern Bering Sea. And so, oh no. Oh, God. Okay. A little bit of kind of background on where we are, kind of relocate yourself. We're not actually looking at Nome specific waters for this particular case study. We're actually looking at the southern Bering Sea. So we're looking around our eco-foci moorings, which are M2 and M4. So kind of right around here, if you can see my cursor.
Yep.
And so in this particular area, we have a lot of different observing assets that are useful in monitoring this relationship between sea ice melt and productivity. But a lot of them have limitations, as Heather has kind of been hinting at throughout this talk. So the first are the moorings that we've been talking about. These have really high temporal resolution, but they are stationary. And so they're not able to move. And that's a limitation in the kind of data it can collect. There are shipboard measurements, which are also called CTD casts. If you kind of imagine a sensor that goes from the surface of the ocean to the bottom of the ocean, that's the kind of data that the CTD is collecting. But these are really large instruments, and they tend to be really difficult to deploy near the ice. And they also require a ship, and our ship time is inherently limited. So they have usually limited temporal resolution. So kind of switching the limitation that the mooring had previously. There's satellite products, and these are really cool because they provide high spatial and temporal resolution, but they can't see below the surface, so no depth resolution. And then we have the glider, which is collecting that high spatial and temporal resolution at the surface and at depth. So really accounting for all of those limitations in the other observing assets in this area of the Bering Sea. And so since I had the privilege of working with this data set, we formulated some research questions around these high resolution data capabilities of the glider. And these questions were, what role can glider deployment play in understanding the productivity regimes in the Bering Sea? And can this sea glider's insight be replicated by more conventional methods such as CTDs and moorings? So really looking at a comparative analysis with the glider data and the CTD, the shipboard measurements, and the moorings to kind of see what unique insight the glider might have, as well as how its data compares to our older methods. So before getting into the actual results, what actually do I mean by the relationship between sea ice and productivity? The main relationship I'm talking about here is the transition from kind of an ice-covered system to the productive summer fishery of the southern Bering Sea. And that transition happens with the onset of some sort of spring plankton bloom. But the actual type of spring plankton bloom can vary based on the amount of sea ice in the area. So the first type of plankton bloom is called an ice-associated bloom. And this happens when we get ice melt in around May, and ice algae, which are photosynthetic organisms living on the bottom of the ice, are going to fall off that ice and provide a really critical carbon boost to both the surface and the benthic ecosystems. So that ice algae is sinking throughout the water column and providing this kind of universal carbon boost. But in warmer years where ice melts in, say, around March or April, we can see that that ice algae hasn't yet formed. So these conditions favor surface phytoplankton blooms, also known as open water blooms. And while that phytoplankton is still providing a carbon boost to the ecosystem, it's usually not sinking as far down in the water column, and therefore has kind of different implications for the area, especially for those benthic organisms, a lot of the time like crabs or just bottom dwelling animals that are relying on that kind of sinking ice algae to survive at the onset of the ice melt. So ecofoci scientists have predicted an increased open water surface bloom frequency with warming, which kind of provides this motivation to study what is the extent of the ice algae in the area, what is the extent of the phytoplankton in the area, and how are those kind of interacting to influence our fisheries in the southern Bering Sea. So getting into the actual data. So Heather showed this before, this is the glider data. This particular mission, I'm showing the chlorophyll, oxygen, PAR, which is a measurement of light, salinity, and temperature time series. And we can kind of see that the glider was able to collect a really wide variation of temperature, salinity, and chlorophyll conditions over a relatively kind of short distance. And we're going to focus on 3 groupings of those conditions to kind of proceed with some sort of analysis. So the first kind of condition, we're going to call them regimes, is this area where we have really consistent salinity and temperature with depth, as well as relatively consistent chlorophyll. There's really not much changing from the 0 to 60 meters in this kind of first part of the data set. But as we get into the second part of the data set, we can see this really clear line where things really start to change. We have an onset of some sort of kind of decrease in salinity, especially at the surface. And we also have clear water column cooling. So these temperatures are around 0 degrees Celsius, and the salinities are around 31 PSU, which are much lower than the previous time series. And then this third kind of regime, if you'll call it that, is marked by this onset of really clear surface warming. So we have surface temperatures of about 4 degrees and really, really high chlorophyll levels at the surface and eventually at the subsurface. So already this glider data is really, really cool because it has captured these 3 separate regimes over just the course of a 1-month deployment, and this glider track is about 500 kilometers. So we can really see how the ocean changes over a small distance, which is really cool.
Is that the track on the bottom?
Yes. Yeah, this is the glider track.
Okay.
Yes. And these are the M4 and M2 moorings just to kind of orient ourselves as to where we are.
Thank you.
Oh no.
Give it a sec.
I believe. Okay. Okay. So these regimes, we can identify them on the time series. We can really see how the conditions are changing, but it can also kind of be helpful to see where these regimes actually exist in space. So this plot on the right is essentially showing the glider track, which has that sideways Y shape that Heather previously showed, where each dot is color-coded to the regime that it belongs to. And then we've also overlaid the ice extent as those kind of figures on the top. So basically the takeaway here is that that well-mixed regime that we were talking about, regime 1, is shown as the easternmost extent of the glider. Clearly, when we deployed the glider, it was in relatively typical late winter, well-mixed southern Bering Sea conditions. As the glider moved up towards the ice edge, it started to record that really fresh, really cold water signal, which from the location of the signal near the ice, we can kind of interpret as a signature of ice melt. And then as the glider kind of went back and south, it recorded this surface warming and increase in chlorophyll. So it's pretty cool because we can, when we put these regimes into space, we can really see the onset of kind of how the environment is interacting with the regimes, specifically with the fact that this decrease in salinity and decrease in temperature is associated with proximity to the ice edge. And so while these regimes are really, really interesting to think about and kind of visualize, on the time series, I also was pretty interested in if these regimes can manifest quantitatively. And so for that, I turned to machine learning. And machine learning is a relatively kind of new tool in the world of oceanography and should always kind of be used with caution because knowledge of the area is really important in kind of interpreting the data, and sometimes feeding it into an algorithm will make things inaccurate, but I wanted to see if that was actually true. So to do that, I used an algorithm called k-means clustering, which essentially is an algorithm that groups data based on similar properties. And those properties that I fed it were delta temperature, delta salinity, delta oxygen, and maximum chlorophyll. So those deltas are just referring to the surface value of that parameter minus the bottom value. And then after kind of determining the optimal number of like clusters or grouping that this algorithm wanted and feeding it into the algorithm, we actually ended up with, essentially what we ended up with was 3 machine learning clusters that were derived from this algorithm that were really similar to the oceanographic regimes that we previously thought about. And so if we look at this plot on the left, this is the plot from the previous slide where every dive is color-coded by the regime that it belongs to. And if we look up this plot on the right, we can see that every dive is color-coded by the cluster it belongs to. And we can see that the algorithm identified the points in similar groupings to how we identified them when we looked at the data. And so this is really cool because the computer has kind of performed a pretty accurate oceanographic analysis of what's going on. And I actually tried to do a similar sort of analysis with other types of foci data, but there just wasn't kind of enough of it to produce this level of accuracy. And so particularly with the measurements I mentioned before, which were the shipboard or like CTD casts, I tried to do a similar thing, but there were only 80 casts as opposed to the glider, which had like 2,500. And so we really need a lot of data to make these kinds of algorithms work. And so it's pretty cool that the glider is providing enough data or providing high enough resolution and high enough data volume to enable approaches like machine learning. And while in this case, we could really see the clear regimes by just looking at the data, there might be future scenarios where we have so much data that we won't be able to visually identify what's going on as easily. And so this could be really helpful if we have a lot of data and we just feed it into an algorithm to see if it can identify patterns that we cannot see at first glance. And so this is pretty cool. I'm also an applied math major, so I just thought it was fun. Okay, so what did we learn? We basically learned that the glider is qualitatively and mathematically illustrating the 3 productivity regimes, the well-mixed, the ice-influenced, and the thermally stratified. And we also learned that the glider is recording the extent of different types of blooms in the area, which is really cool. And then we also learned, as I said, these really distinct and clear regimes in really close proximity are not present with the CTD and the mooring data, which is kind of indicating this really novel representation of bloom types and oceanographic regimes with glider data, and really indicating why it's a really special instrument. And that's why we're presenting on it. So I'm going to hand it back to Heather.
And leave it on this machine.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll leave it on. No worries.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, Anjali. Okay. We have a few more slides and then we'll do questions. And I know we're running late, so
That's not a problem. Great science.
I just want to be respectful of people who have to be. So I don't know why you would need to be somewhere. It's Thursday. Okay, so this actually, the little yellow squiggly line, that is the glider that is in the water right now. This data I pulled about an hour and a half ago. So This is the last of our 3 missions. So this is running a similar line to what Anjali talked about in hers, so in the southeastern Bering, but this one we've started with M8. So this actually got deployed off of Sikuliak when Sikuliak first left Nome. So this is one of their first sites that they went out to. So they went to turn around the moorings at M8. We covered some amazing stuff that was there. I'm sure you guys will hear about it next week. And they also deployed the glider for us. And then when our eco-foci fall mooring crews will go out to turn around the moorings there on the 70-meter ice bath, some in the Gulf, off of Dutch, we will pick up the glider. And so it's just running as far south as it can until we get out there to pick it up. And then we'll be able to look at that. And the plot you see on the lower right-hand side is what we see on the interface of the glider. Right now, it just says everything's looking good. It's plotting temperature, salinity over depth. And you can see, saline, nice, cool water there on the bottom, and less saline, warmer water at the top, like it should show. So on the interface, you can hover over it. It will give you what dive you're on, whether it was a dive or a downcast or an upcast, essentially, whether it was going up or down. So thought that was something fun to throw in today of real live things that are happening. Okay, so what's next? What's happening as we go through this? So is that working? What's wrong?
No, I have to.
Oh yeah, okay. I was like, what? Okay, so we've got working on our analysis and write-up. So on the M14s, we've got 3 years of data there for temperature, salinity, fluorometer, and currents through the ADCP. We've got the glider. So we'll be working on this sort of Northern Bering Sea focused publication with Phyllis. And with that, we're also going to close out sort of this particular component of our project. So at this point, the gliders will consider, part of our foci toolbox and our a new way for us to look at information, and we'll continue working on deploying them. Hopefully not just off NOAA ships, but again, here out of Nome, when that opportunity can present itself again. And go ahead, you get your other ones.
So then the glider data also has the potential to improve some algorithms that have been predicting what kind of blooms are dominating the Bering Sea. But those algorithms have only been using surface data. So they have the potential to kind of improve what's going on there. And then there's also the ability to draw correlations between phytoplankton bloom types and higher trophic level dynamics, which will have implications for long-term fisheries health and management in this area.
Yeah. And I'll add a little bit to that, using this to help with modeling. So sort of potentially looking at interfaces between the cold pool, right? The rest of the water, what's been happening. The more we know about temperature, the better chance we have about potentially predicting harmful algal blooms or HABs, which I know is of concern, especially here in the region where we have very large Alexandrium cysts. It also builds on some components, so a very NOAA-centric, but the Climate Ecosystems Fisheries Initiative, which was an IRA-funded huge amount of money into NOAA to help support end-to-end infrastructure for ocean modeling and decision support systems.
What does IRA for NOAA mean?
The Inflation Reduction Act and the what's the BIL stand for? But they were two. Oh, guys, it's time for my kids to go to bed. Okay. But there were two very large sums of money thrown into NOAA to support.
Around here, it means Indian Restoration Act. So
yeah, no, not that. Yep. Gotta love us and our acronyms. Yeah. But Inflation Reduction Act. Yes. No, it's good. Yeah. So again, just another component where, foundational information, that we're collecting to provide for a lot of different reasons and sources. All right. And some other things that we'll present on, we annually for EcoFoci, we presented what's called a preview of ecosystem and economic conditions, prevent with our partners at fisheries. Yvette, who presented here in January, we work really closely with her to help provide indicators for the ecosystem status report. I've been working on some new information with that, so I think that will be neat. And ways to kind of join in with us. For the EcoFoci program, we run a spring and fall seminar series. We traditionally host it like Straight Science online, and you are more than welcome to join us at any time. If you would like to be on our mailing list, please just email me and I can share that email here at the end. Stay tuned next week. Join us for the Strait Science Seminar because that will be Sekuliak that's coming off of the Arctic Collaborative Ecosystem Cruise. So again, the vessel that just deployed, our new glider here in the 2020 or 2024 season. But they've had a pretty successful mission, I think, up to date. And so they'll be here talking next Thursday. So that will be Seth and Jackie. And if you're not on the daily updates as a community member for the Arctic Collaborative Ecosystem Cruise, you can also message me because I'm in charge of that mailing list. And then Jashu Zhang will actually be up here in Nome in early September. She's also working in our group. We're working really closely with her. So stay tuned for that because she'll be giving us Strait Science. So EcoFoci is doing a lot of different things with a lot of different partners. So stay tuned for that. And then I just shared our social media handles. I know a lot of folks up here are on the Facebook group. So equally, whether you're on Instagram or Facebook, it's NOAA Research and NOAA Fisheries. And with that, we want to say thank you to all the folks that have helped with all of the work that we've done with the glider. Picture here from the mountain last time I was in Nome in 2017, and the lower picture of one of our engineers deploying the glider here before it went out, the Audrey Katie. Just like to take our partners. And Gay, thank you so much for always being such a wonderful host. And I don't know what it is about me coming to Nome, but man, but we push through and we do it. So thank you to everybody online as well. So appreciate it.
All right. So this is the time for the Strait Science audience in-house as well to give a little love to Anjali and Heather in the comments. It's never easy to be a public speaker, and it's certainly never easy when the technology is fighting you the entire time. But I think Anjali just received, Anjali, I want a Holling Scholar. Are you in school for, you getting your PhD?
No, I'm an undergrad.
You're an undergrad. One of these. She's so smart, and she figured out all the technological stuff for us here, so we could all see it at the end. And thank you for your perseverance, both of you. So does anyone have any questions for either of our speakers about the drone? I know I do. Go ahead, Doug. Go ahead, Doug, you can unmute.
There we go. And Anjali, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, there we go. Anjali, can you go back to your slide? I think it was number 19. It has the glider oceanographic regimes where I have the 3 regimes. I'm just wondering if you could interpret that a little bit, especially between regime 1 and regime 3. I mean, it looks like you're going from east to west, and they're both about the same distance from the ice front. But is the algae bloom just a matter of timing, or can you kind of give a little context of what the biology of what's going on there?
Yeah. I actually forgot to talk about the algae bloom because I was nervous. So thank you for asking this question. So the algae bloom there is, to my understanding, and Phyllis, feel free to jump in here, is a result of that surface warming. That's creating a stratification, which is allowing for that chlorophyll bloom to come through. And the really kind of significant, is this the one? Okay, yeah.
Mhm.
So you have like really consistent, like the well mixed conditions over here are likely a result of a lot of wind. And so when there's a lot of wind in an area, the chlorophyll isn't really going to be able to build up in like large chunks. It's just going to get kind of constantly mixed through. So that's likely a reason as to why there's that like really clear bloom in regime 3 as opposed to that kind of constant mixing in regime 1. Another thing to kind of note is that the glider went through regime 1 about kind of a month earlier than it went through regime 3. So there's a difference in conditions, but there's also a difference in timing So if you plopped the glider in regime 1 during the exact same time as regime 3, it might actually have like similar conditions. So that's kind of a limitation of what we're looking at here.
So timing was part of it too. And then,
Mhm.
so in that regime 3, if I could continue there, Gabe. In that regime 3, you have a nice spike of oxygen in association with that chlorophyll. So I guess it's just the phytoplankton creating more oxygen. Is that what's going on there?
Yes, yes.
And then down on the bottom where you have the temperature, oops, I lost it. Looks, that's just a thermocline between where the yellow is and the orange and purple.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good. That just helps give you a little context there. Interpreting that. Thank you. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Charlie, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
You said, Charlie. So, hello. Like Doug, I'm a retired fish and game biologist. I wanted to comment on your regime 2 and the salinity and temperature, and they go hand in hand. Right? We used to manage the herring fishery right after breakup, and right as breakup occurred in Norton Sound, and you, on a calm day, you can see the viscous fresh water because it's so close to freezing. It's more viscous than the salt water, and so it's smooth where there's a little ripple on the salt, and I went out and measured that because it drove the herring. There'd be a wall of herring backed up against one of those freshwater lenses, and it was really cold, and it was and fairly delineated. I mean, like a real abrupt transition from fresh to salt. So at least on the surface. And other times I've been out at night during that time period and taking a boat, and the water was so cold as the air temperature neared freezing, the surface would freeze, and you'd suddenly find yourself in a slush puppy, and then a couple hours into daylight, it would all disappear. But that salinity and cold front it certainly drives herring, but it also drives salmon and other fish that are migratory in that time period. So like capelin, and I think that's something to study as well. So anyway, just a comment. Thanks.
So
Appreciate
Charlie,
that, Charlie. Phyllis, go ahead.
yeah, I just have a question. The herring, were they mainly in the upper part of the water column?
Yes. Well,
Thank you.
Norton Sound's quite shallow, so yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate you sharing that.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. I have a question. I don't see anything in the chat. I don't see anyone's hand raised. Charlie, your hand is still raised, but I figure you'll just jump in if I'm not letting you ask your question. The thing is, you mentioned the harmful algal blooms. So in 2022, we had the most persistent, largest, and most toxic algal bloom of Alexandria nationwide. And that really, we took the prize, and we didn't know we were in the running for the prize. And that was a big surprise. And does this, I don't think you went over maybe how this propels itself through the water, if it's passive, and what its strength kind of is. It sounds like it just it got whooshed along. But there are certain kinds of sampling devices, like they have this imaging flow cytobot that we've been hearing about, the IFCB is its acronym. Is your glider something that, even if it's just getting whooshed up through the north, we could have something like that on, or some sort of algal detection
Yeah.
kind of thing that even if you don't know the exact kind, you may figure out you're going through a bloom, like even just like a light sensor or something like
Yeah.
that?
So I'll answer part of it, but I can guess that Phyllis probably also wants
Yeah,
to jump
she's
in
ready.
here.
Look, she's leaning
I know
into the
she is,
screen.
but
Let's see.
I want to give some predate. When we started developing this in 2015, that
Yeah.
was one of the goals, is
Oh,
to
okay.
to miniaturize an IFCB to get it on
Wonderful.
the glider. That being said, there's been a lot of other developmental hurdles, but I can say that having, like Sekuliak right now has the IFCB on it. Most the Dyson will have, I don't know if actually we have it on the Dyson, but having that kind of technology into a glider would be ideal.
Yeah,
for the very
wonderful.
reason that you say.
Yeah,
Those things don't always happen so fast,
yeah.
and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So I don't know where we're at with that, but I will say we've all talked about it, and it would be a goal if we could
So
do it.
maybe there's some kind of device, if it can't give us the precision of an IFCB, at least we're going to hear in the Straight Sciences coming this fall about different ways people are trying this.
Yep. The satellite's working really well. I think that will be a neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping people can hear me. I don't know if we're working off the ceiling microphones or if I need to be
I think it's okay. I think you're okay.
up there.
You're coming in really light there, Gay. Really, really
Oh.
light.
All
Yeah.
right, so here's what I'm gonna do. So I'll come up here. So this harmful algal bloom issue is huge, and we'll hear as the fall unfolds, there's a lot of research coming from these different remote satellites. People are trying to use aircraft cameras, satellite cameras, the glider. I mean, it's all starting to hopefully make some sense here so that we can start really getting a handle on this issue that is really frightening for both conservation of marine resources that are affected by harmful algal blooms, our public health, and our food safety and security. So it's a kind of interesting, stay tuned, but I'm really excited you guys are even thinking about that. And maybe there's something more, maybe not as detailed in its algal detection, like it won't tell you, here's the picture, here's the
Yeah.
species, here's the
It
count.
may not give us the cyst count.
Yeah, but it'll actually alert you to you're in a bloom, maybe good algae bloom, but something
We've
like
been,
that.
when the satellites are working, it's just pretty well. But Phyllis, do you want to jump in? I know
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to confirm the IFCB is a really promising piece of equipment. We're still early in the doing the calibrations to come up with the algorithms that will tell us things. But I think this is the second or third year we've used them on the ships there, and we're hoping that we'll have those algorithms and that we'll be able to that it'll be public information for everybody. We're also
Wonderful.
coupling it a bit with some of the environmental DNA sampling that's happening out there, with the hopes that that could also be adapted to for a rapid response thing. The technology is truly remarkable at the moment, and I think there's a lot of promise in different mechanisms, from the IFCB to satellites, etc., that hopefully we will be able, as a group, all of us will be able to figure out how to make these warnings. The West Coast has had, have warnings for probably 10 years now. And it's just
That's the west coast of the continental or the contiguous West,
Oregon,
not
Washington,
Alaska.
Oregon, Washington, California, and it's to do it is a partnership among everybody to be able to do it well.
And
And
it's been going a long time in the Northeast, right? So, yeah.
I do have one other question for you, Phyllis, and that is, in the Bering Strait region this summer, starting in actually I may have one other, in late July, we've had a military operation by the Department of Defense, and it has been extensive and it has been long. And the first portion, I know we've got some Nome people on, I think was about 2 weeks starting in late July to mid-August, where one of the assets they brought here was a 750-foot gray-hulled expeditionary sea base vessel that ran, the top of the vessel, huge. the top of the vessel runs helicopter sorties or whatever you call it. But the middle of the deck, if you watch the YouTube videos and you're trying to be nosy on I think it's called the James Canley, Canley, number 6 is the number of the ship. And they do a lot of, they were in their video showing off their ship. And one of the things they do is a lot of underwater equipment, drones, and things like that that they're mentioning. So I'm wondering, you're federal, they're federal. I don't know your world, but for goodness sake, we had this humongous platform here for several weeks and doing all kinds of things. They ran up to the Chukchi and came back down. They came off in front of Nome, but they were really stationed just north of St. Lawrence Island. And, you know, we don't know what they're doing, except they're doing what they need to do. And is there military, you know, are you able to chat with those guys? No.
No, but I envision the data they've collected and I covered it, but I will never see it.
So they don't share oceanographic data. Okay, that's good to know, sadly. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to make a note also to you, Phyllis. We've had a tremendous, and I think we'll break some pretty close to getting to maybe over 100-year record on the amount of fresh water that we are receiving here out of the sky in the Nome Bering Strait region basically since July. I think we're over a foot of rain. And so there should be a fairly impressive freshwater lens, although it's gotten mixed with this this ex-typhoon. We were gusting 57 knots or miles an hour when these two speakers were trying to land, so they had an exciting landing into Nome. So things are probably mixed. We're seeing commercial fishing of pollock again for the 5th year in a row in the southwestern Chukchi Sea. Is that something that, with your oceanographic smarts, I mean, can you address what may be occurring? Are we seeing that? I'm kind of confused at this point, but a little bit, because my brain is, you know, it's what it is. But from whichever mooring was seeing that mixed warm layer.
Yeah. So what Heather kind of showed it at the M8 mooring, that the bottom temperatures are now at M8 are now above 0 degrees. And it used to behave, if the water was cold enough, pollock and Pacific cod would stay, you know, wouldn't go into it. The bottom temperatures are now warm enough, and you could see it in the 2010 and 2019 pollock maps. Yeah, the cold pool is the pink thing in 2010, and the pollock, adult pollock, not juveniles, avoid it. So do Pacific cod. But once you lose that cold pool, those really cold temperatures, Pacific cod and pollock will make their way northward. And that's what we're beginning to see. M8, which is a mooring, long-term mooring, you're now beginning to see these temperatures warmer. Warm is a relative thing. It's above 0 degree temperatures on the bottom. And that's a corridor for subarctic species, such as pollock and peacock, to move northward. And we're trying to understand what's the exact cause of these warmer temperatures. It's not just the loss of ice. We think there's advection of warmer water from the south. And since ice hasn't covered the southern shelf like it used to, it means that the southern shelf has warmer temperatures, and that's just advected northward. And you're seeing it on the bottom here. And so it's related to the temperatures. Do you have a cold pool to keep the pollock and peacock and other subarctic species out of the northern Bering and Chukchi Sea?
So thank you very much, Phyllis, for that, because that's a good explanation. My zoning in on that, my question is, since we don't know, we have no fishery data or survey data, whatever, for the north of Diomede in the southern Chukchi Sea in US water, so near Shish and northwest Arctic
Just so
Borough.
you know.
But we do have this,
Diabetes
we
right
do
here.
have this, you know, I was thinking, why are they able to fish pollock? Because if that should be on a deer current water, right, which would be cooler than Alaska coastal current, or do we have any idea as to what's driving the pollock to be again and again? If that's what it is, I don't know.
But once they, it's really, I have real questions of how well they're going to do in the Chukchi, pollock, and Pacific cod. But, it allows them to move up earlier. And so once they're up there, once the water begins to warm up in the summer in the Chukchi, there's a habitat. The problem is they have to escape the Chukchi before the ice comes down because they don't do well in below -1 degree water.
Right.
So it's dropping our preconceived notions of how the system works and making enough calculations and measurements and observations to figure out exactly what's going on. And we're still, at least I am still scratching my head on some of the things we're seeing. I never expected to see these changes this early.
And the fact that they're still fishing with multiple vessels, I mean, it's worth the investment. There's 4 up there currently that I'm aware of.
The Russians?
Yeah, and these are commercial size, big, and there's a cargo vessel, or at least it's labeled as a cargo vessel at anchor near these ships. So it's probably
Processing.
Either processing or loading up. Yeah, or loading up to take processed fish somewhere else. I don't know. I mean, we're all guessing, but the fact that there's that kind of activity going on again and again, multiple ships, I mean, they're making an investment. Charlie, do you have any thoughts on this? Charlie Lee? I don't know if he's still.
Yeah, I'm here. Typically, I call them tramp steamers, but frequently those processing vessels, when they're doing well, call in a freezer ship to take their product so that they can continue functioning. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. And hopefully the glider, I know it's not allowed to sneak over onto the Russian side. The rules of science, for those who are not aware,
stop.
You cannot, our waters are for our science and for our commercial purposes. Russia's water is for their commercial purposes and for another country. It's not just Russia, but another country is for their science and for their commercial activities. So we have to be mindful, and we're in very mindful times right now in the Bering Strait region. So hopefully we'll learn more, as hopefully your glider can zip up there in the Chukchi. Are there any plans for that, Chukchi?
There were originally, we're hoping to do the southern Chukchi, the US part of it. To do our original plan was to do a box there, go around several times to try and map how the temperature and salinity change in that southern Chukchi region on the US side, which would give us a better understanding of exactly, hopefully, a number of things. But that was on the original plan. And I, at least, still have hopes to do that because I think it would address a number of questions we have on the spatial scale of this warming that we're seeing.
Yeah, thank you very much. And good to see you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Somebody had their hand raised. I don't know who
Oh,
it was.
Doug, you had your hand raised.
No, you kind of touched on that when you were talking about how the pollock were moving around. You answered my question.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we might as well let people go and thank you all for coming for next week on Tuesday I believe Tuesday is the 27th.
It's a Tuesday.
Sikuliak will be arriving here in Nome at the dock, weather permitting,
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Good
And
luck.
we will be doing a straight science with much better
Hey, watch it.
technical, no, well, all I'm gonna do is study up on this and see what went wrong. Much better technical, whatever. So if not, I would welcome people to come, I would urge people to come down to the campus to see it for real, so you
Yes,
don't have to watch
definitely.
it from home. But we will have the latest information. We'll have the chief scientists, Seth Danielson and Jackie Grebmeyer. Seth Danielson is with UAF, University of Alaska Fairbanks College of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences, as well as Jackie Grebmeyer with the University of Maryland. They've been leading they're part of the leads for.
There's 4 leads. Phyllis is one of the third, and
Okay.
Katrin, who's also on the cruise, is the 4th. So
Okay, Katrin Eichen and Phyllis Stabenow. Katrin is with UAF, College of Fisheries and Ocean Sciences, and Phyllis Stabenow here tonight with us with NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Lab. And so we will have fresh from the boat. It's a rare opportunity to hear what's just happened, what they've just seen. They've been right now tonight. I took a look. They're probably 100 miles or more north of Utqiagvik. So they will have a good tale to tell us of what they've seen. And there's multiple different disciplines on the boat, doing everything from marine mammals to algae to water temperature, the whole suite. So tune in next week, same time, 6:30, and this will be on Tuesday night here in person on campus as well as on Zoom, although I'd come down to campus since we're doing it again in this room. With that, thank you all for coming and have a good night. We'll see you Tuesday.
thank you. Thank you.